telephonic participation here, so. And we'll gavel the meeting in and get started. Peggy in South Africa and Dean in home.
Hello.
Regent Johnson, is that you?
Speaking.
All right, we have not begun the meeting yet. We're still trying to track down Regent Lucas.
Okay, I'll stand by.
Yeah.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Regent Lucas, did I hear a beep?
Yes, you did. I'm here.
Outstanding. All right, we have not begun yet, but we are going to begin right now, and I'd like to call to order the special meeting of the University of Minnesota's Board of Regents. And first of all, I'd like to ask the board that's present here, are there any objections to telephonic participation by Regents Lucas and Regent Johnson? I don't think we need an actual motion. I'm just looking for if anybody objects, we can have a motion and a vote, but if no one objects, I'll assume it's okay. That's a tidying up of our bylaws that we need to take care of this year, perhaps in your committee, Regent Regent Rocha. So before we begin our business today, I'll briefly report on the progress of the Presidential Performance Review Committee. Regents Omari and Powell and I have been engaging in that effort, and as I reported at our July meeting, I anticipate we will deliver our report on that, on President Kaler's performance for the past academic year at our September board meeting. Now we have two items of business before us today, both consequential to our work in ensuring the university's future success. The first item on our agenda is President's Employment Agreement and the amendments to that. We've all had a chance to review the new agreement, but I'll summarize the key points here quickly. First, President Kaler will continue to serve as president in his current role through June 30th, 2019. From July 1st, 2019 through June 30th, 2020, he will serve as President Emeritus, and the responsibilities of that position are outlined in your docket materials, but will include engagement in fundraising and development activities as well as transitional support work. During that time, he will continue to report to the board. Then from July 1st, 2020 through July 31st, 2020, President Kaler will be on a 6-month transitional leave before he assumes a faculty position in the College of Science and Engineering. Details about President Kaler's salary during all phases of the agreement and other details are outlined in the contract. And now I'd entertain a motion to approve.
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Are there any questions or comments? Regent Hsu.
Thank you, Chair McMillan. I have a question about the honorary chair to be established by the Board of Regents. Is that, I mean, what is that? And is it only for the transitional leave period, or does it extend farther than that? And if there's anything else we should know about that I haven't asked.
Regent Shu, we had conversations with the president and did some research about how this has been handled in the past, and there was a chair set up, but never formally, it was anticipated and envisioned, but never formally created and funded for President Brunix during his transition. That no longer exists. We were going to use the same one, but since it no longer exists, we need to create a new one, and the details of that are going to be up to the board. It's my understanding that that would continue during his time as a member of the faculty, not limited to the transition period. In fact, it would come into play when he returns to active duty at the faculty. But this board will create it, and its size and extent will be up to us. Does that answer your question?
Thank you, Chair McMillan. It does and it doesn't. It seems like it's kind of out there. I mean, is this, will there be a financial component to this honorary chair, or is it just an honorary chair, which is a title that he'll be able to use while he's here at the university?
What President Kaler and I have discussed is that there will be a modest financial component to it that would support research and activities that would be expected of him in a role as a well-renowned and highly statured member of the chemical engineering department. Not significant, however. Yes, Regent Simonson.
Will that be something that the whole board will vote on before it's put into effect?
I think that would make the most sense. I'll make that commitment if I'm
Thank you.
chair at that point.
Thank you.
I think it's worth recording for posterity that we will indeed take a formal action of the board to set that up.
Thank you.
Other questions, comments before I call for a vote? All right, all in favor of roll call vote? All right, all in favor of the President Kaler amended employment agreement? Signify so. Well, I guess you're going to do a roll call, so sorry.
No, that's right.
Mr. Steves.
Regent Anderson.
Yes.
Regent Anderson votes yes. Regent Beeson.
No.
Regent Beeson votes no. Regent Cohen.
Well, I reluctantly, because I believe we have an outstanding president now, and I hate to see him leave his position, but I vote yes.
Regent Cohen votes yes. Regent Shu.
Yes.
Regent Shu votes yes. Regent Johnson.
No.
Regent Johnson votes no. Regent Lucas.
Yes.
Regent Lucas votes yes. Regent Omari.
Yes.
Regent Omari votes yes. Regent Powell.
Yes.
Regent Powell votes yes. Regent Rocha.
Yes.
Regent Rocha votes yes. Regent Simonson.
Yes.
Regent Simonson votes yes. Regent Swigum.
Yes.
Regent Swigum votes yes. Chair McMillan.
Yes.
Chair McMillan votes yes.
Very good. That is a 10-2 total and recorded as requested. So we are now complete on that agenda item, and we'll move on to our second item of business, which is the presidential search that lies before us. And earlier this week, Regent Powell and I updated the university community on the progress of the search for the 17th president of the university. As I say that, I'm struck by the importance and gravity of what lays before us. The fact that we're looking for the 17th president means we've only had 16, and the organization has been here since before the founding of the state. So it says something about the importance of the scope and the role and the breadth and the overall importance of what we embark upon. A key first step in that process was selecting Storbeck Pimentel and Associates, an executive search firm, to assist us in a thoughtful, thorough, well-communicated, and planful search. I'm happy to report that Mr. Pimentel and Mr. Gates from Storbeck Pimentel are here to join us for our conversation today. Mr. Pimentel and Mr. Gates will present a prospective timeline for the search, and understanding our commitment to our stakeholders will also address opportunities for engagement with students, faculty, staff, alumni, benefactors, and the broader university and Minnesota communities. I also want to remind everyone at this juncture that we are currently accepting nominations for candidates to serve on the Search Advisory Committee. Nominations will be accepted until 5 p.m. on Wednesday, August 15th. For more information on how to submit a nomination and to stay up to date on the progress of the search, visit the Presidential Search website at president-search.umn.edu. We anticipate the board will ratify the committee's membership and its formal charge at our meeting in September, but we have a lot of work to do before then. Mr. Pimentel and Mr. Gates, we look forward to your presentation and discussion about our next steps. And I have only one more thing to note. I don't have President Kaler at my side, which is typically what happens here, and I just want to be sure everybody understands. He and I had a discussion. He offered to be here, but we both thought probably best, since we're talking about his contract and his successor, that he attend to business, which is what he's doing in the year ahead. He's at Farm Fest as we speak. So before somebody asked me where President Kaler is, we did discuss it, and I appreciated his approach on that. So without further from the chair, Mr. Pimentel and Mr. Gates, you have the floor. Welcome.
Thank you, Chairman McMillan. Appreciate the opportunity to represent our firm in assisting you in this important search. Most importantly, though, we want to thank you for the thoughtful way in which the board has decided to plan and execute this transition. The transition plan that you've put together is something that's becoming more and more common in higher education circles, and it facilitates not only the transition of leadership, but frankly, it also helps in the recruitment process. And you'll see that as we go through this process, that candidates are going to refer to how this transition is being handled. It allows for a quick and deliberate transition, but more importantly, it also allows for the board to have time to be selective regarding the type of candidate that you ultimately identify as your next president. So thank you for the thoughtful planning of that, as that will assist with the search process. Often when we start these searches, the question is always raised, well, what does a search firm really do for us? And I'd like to address that, because as we talk about the process and the timeline that we propose following, you're going to see different pieces fall into place. Part of what we're going to be doing for you in order to make sure that you have the most robust and qualified candidate pool is going after individuals that normally wouldn't apply for the position on their own. These are individuals who are doing exceptional jobs at the current institutions and therefore not interested in looking at other opportunities. And part of what we bring to the table is our ability to reach out to those individuals and encourage them to look at the opportunity and then to become full candidates. So part of what we're going to be doing with your search committee is engaging in that process of identifying high quality individuals and recruiting them, not just waiting for them to apply, as most strong candidates, and certainly in our experience of doing hundreds of searches, isn't really the case. The best candidates never really apply. They have to be coaxed into it. The second piece that is going to be important in this particular search is making sure that we have diversity in the search process. As a woman in a minority-owned firm, we do pay attention to the diversity, but there's also diversity in terms of the type of background that a candidate may bring to the table. So in the process that we will follow, we'll make sure that we reach out not only to those individuals who are considered traditional candidates, those are individuals coming from historically academic environments and may have been dean, provosts, presidents of their institutions, but we're also going to reach out to those individuals from non-traditional backgrounds, those individuals coming from industry, from government, from other sectors, a nonprofit, other sectors where you would see demonstrated leadership in something that you as a committee and you as a board and the committee may want to consider. The other aspect that you should be aware of is you're entering an environment that is now becoming more and more competitive. The fight for good, strong leadership has always been a difficult one, but in recent years, institutions that are at your tier of which there are approximately 115. And if we really narrow the list down to those that are members of the AAU, then there are only 62, 60 of which are in the United States, 2 of which are in Canada. If you look at those institutions, almost 45 of them completed presidentials and chancellor searches just within the last 3 years. Another 40 of those have presidents and chancellors who have been in the positions for more than 7 years. So when you look at the target population that you could pursue, it becomes a very, very limited role. And as a result of that, this is where we as a firm are going to be able to bring some advantages, partly because of our network and partly because of our aggressive stance in recruiting candidates. So know that reaching out and knowing the competitive forces and how to position this opportunity is going to be a strength that we will bring to the table. And lastly, one of the challenges that always takes place in any search is the retention of candidates. It's a job to get them in, but the second job is to keep them. Because a funny thing happens to those individuals who previously were not interested in looking at opportunities, and that is that once they say yes to someone, then they feel obligated to look around at all other opportunities. And you might wonder, well, what other opportunities might there be currently? Well, there are several that are going to be direct competitors to you. University of Colorado is about ready to launch its search. USC just announced yesterday that they're moving forward with their search. You have the University of Rochester that started their search a couple of weeks back. You have the University of Connecticut that did the same. You got Michigan State that is doing the same. And those are, and then you have, of course, the University of Tennessee that recently lost their president and currently have a vacancy both at the system level as well as the campus level. These are all institutions that will be competing against you. So having a firm that is going to be out in the market and being aggressive about it and moving the process along swiftly, you're going to find is going to play to your benefit. So with that in mind, we should talk a little bit about what a process would look like and what does timing look like, especially given that I've said several times that we would need to move deliberately and quickly. But please understand that the pace of the search is dictated in large part by the quality of the candidate pool. If you have a strong candidate pool, that allows you the flexibility to move quickly. If the pool is not strong or is not the kind of pool that you could get excited about, and then we have to step back and slow it down until such time that those candidates that get you excited and you could be very enthusiastic about are in the pool. And that is going to be crucial to the success of the search, is that at different junctures, we need to stop and take notice of the quality of the pool and determine whether or not the quality of the pool is sufficiently strong to propel us forward and not let momentum drive us forward. So as we do this, let me talk a little bit about what this process might look like. Understand that these processes work best when they're transparent, when there's a high level of participation by the campus community, and where the candidates are allowed to explore the opportunity without fear of jeopardizing their current roles. So along that line, what we would propose as a timeline, and I'll direct you to the docket, your dockets and the information that's contained therein. First thing that we want to do is, after you identify the committee chair and you identify the members of the committee, is we'd like to meet with them as quickly as possible. And the purpose of the meeting is to establish what the process is going to look like, how the process needs to be altered in order for it to satisfy the needs of this campus community, because a one-size-fits-all approach does not work. What I might have done in another university doesn't necessarily fit well here. And so we have to customize the process, and it's best done with the participation and full engagement of the search committee. So in that first meeting, I would hope that would happen right after you as a board announce the members of the committee, that we would be able to sit down, talk about process, talk about timeline, and talk about more specifically how we're going to engage the input of the different campus stakeholders. Keep in mind that when we start a process of this type, it's important that we focus not only internally, but that we also include people externally, meaning that we need to look at those key stakeholders, whether they be donors, supporters of the institution, members of government, both local as well as state, whether it includes individuals who have business before the university. We need to include their voices in this process. It really does need to be an inclusive process in order for it to be successful. So our hope would be that we would kick off the search by having that first meeting with the committee sometime in the second week or so of September, shortly after you've announced the members. Following that, we would suspect that we'd be involved in a process that would reach at least the following 2 weeks or so, during which we visit each and every one of your campuses, meet with faculty, staff, students, meet with members of the community, meet with the campus leaders, and identify others that I may not be aware of that we should involve in this discussion, and all with the hope that we ask several important questions. First and foremost, how they perceive the challenges and opportunities, what they perceive those challenges and opportunities to be for the next president. Second, we would want to talk with them about what qualities, characteristics, and background the successful candidates must have in order to engender that high level of enthusiasm that's going to be necessary for that individual to garner the support not only of this board, but frankly of the different campuses and the stakeholders involved. In doing that outreach, it's important that members of the search committee be heavily involved in that participation, in that level of engagement. It's not good enough for just the consultants to go out to visit these sites and to listen. It's better for the search committee to be heavily involved in that process so they could hear firsthand how people are describing the opportunities and the challenges and where the next president might make an impact. Because that will help then develop the filters, the appropriate filters, to assess the candidates. In doing that, the end result of the stakeholder meetings and all this engagement is usually 2 sets of documents. One document is the advertisement, and then the second document is a position profile. That position profile is a much more elaborate document that only describes the university, but describes the opportunity and the potential for the new president to make an impact. And we would hope that that document be ready for distribution and publication at the tail end of September, first part of October. And again, I'm speaking in general time frame only because I haven't had the benefit of sitting down and meeting with the committee to iron out these dates, but those would be the approximate dates. Following the stakeholder sessions and listening tour and the publication of those documents and the opportunity for people to provide input electronically through a variety of different aspects, whether it be the website or other media, then we would go out and begin the recruitment process. Now, before I talk about recruitment, I'm going to stop for a second because I've talked a lot about outreach, and I know that's an important aspect of what we do, but it's also an important aspect for finding the right candidate. And so I want to make sure that I provide ample opportunity for you to ask any questions about how that might take place and who we would include and whatever part of the process might be important to you. So let me stop at this point and take any questions if that would be to your benefit.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Pimentel. I think that is the right way to go, and I'd encourage the board members here to get my attention anytime you've got a point as we work through this conversation. It's important that it's interactive. It's important that it's two-way. And anybody got any thoughts for the team yet? Based on what you just heard, Regent Spigham.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Mr. Pimentel, just to be very clear, you mentioned 6, 7, 8 institutions right now of higher learning that are looking for new leadership. You are not a consultant for any of those.
No, sir.
There's
no conflict. No, sir.
Regent Simonson.
What experience have you had with non-traditional? Non-traditional candidates?
I appreciate you asking that, Regent Simonson. In the country currently, if you look at the top 115 research universities, there are, at last count, 11 non-traditional type individuals who are serving as presidents and or chancellors. And our firm placed more than half of those. Okay. And I was personally involved with many of those.
Follow-up, Regent Simonson.
Follow-up. Recently in the paper, we've heard about how stressful this job is, hard work, many areas, many people to serve, overwhelming, all that kind of stuff. You know, I'm looking at somebody who's really committed, not a job, but a privilege and responsibility. How do you balance that?
You know, appreciate you asking that question. I intend to represent major public research universities. That's where I find my strength. And if we look a little closer, they tend to be land-grant institutions. And as a result of that, part of that land-grant culture and value system is the commitment to what services that institution offers the citizenry of the state in which it resides. And so part of what we do as we recruit candidates is try to determine by asking questions, doing reference checks, and seeing whether or not the individual is excited about this institution versus excited about the title of president. Big difference between the two. I'm not all that excited about someone who's seeking the title or someone who has a history of changing jobs every 3 or 4 years. What I'm looking for is a history of stability, a history where the individual can demonstrate that they have contributed and engaged in a deeper level beyond their job, and a commitment to the values that are held and exposed and talked about when we talk about a land-grant institution. If an individual doesn't demonstrate those values, I will tell you it'd be very tough to convince anybody that they're going to be here for the right reasons.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Pimentel, and thank you, Regent Simonson, for getting us, breaking the door open on the qualifications and characteristics conversation. We will delve deeper there, and I certainly encourage the committee to be thinking about those questions. I want to keep you focused on process, and then maybe the second half of the conversation will tackle more of what you were just discussing with Regent Simonson. Before you resume, though, I have to remember that we have Regent Johnson and Regent Lucas online, and you two are going to need to jump in at any point if you want to be heard, okay? Just interrupt who's ever talking, me or our speakers, and let me know. So, Regent Hsu.
Thank you, Chair McMillan. Thank you, presenters. I don't know if you're familiar with our history, but we have had a history of presidential searches where we've been accused of not following the state statutes in terms of data practices, and we've been sued by the Star Tribune back in 2002, and we lost that lawsuit at the Supreme Court level, at the Minnesota Supreme Court level, and I've not seen any documentation or anything for us to help us understand exactly, what we're supposed to be doing and not doing in this process. And I don't know that it's covered in the materials that I've looked at so far. So I guess my question maybe isn't necessarily to you, but I wanted to make sure you were aware that, we have these potential landmines out there. But maybe if Chair McMillan could update us on what we're doing to try and understand that, and if there's a memorandum that we're going to receive at some point that explains.
Thank you, Regent Hsu. We have leadership with the board office leadership and with the general counsel's office been carefully thinking about these matters. You raised the specter of something that might be very helpful, and that is a kind of a primer from the general counsel's office as we launch this thing, to make sure that we don't run afoul of that. But we've learned, I think, from history, and I trust we'll go forward in a legally appropriate manner. I'm quite confident we will. And rather than have General Counsel Peterson come up here now, why don't we look for a properly contexted and well-explained perspective on both the law and how we plan to proceed. We'll comply with that.
Thank you.
Yours again, Mr. Pimentel and Mr. Gates.
Excellent. So in this recruitment process, the first step is the fact-finding. That's what I just discussed, making sure we do a thorough casting of the net in order to capture as much information as possible from the different stakeholders about what we should be looking for. And frankly, not only what we need in the professional qualifications, but what makes someone successful here in this environment. It's the fit question, and trying to, and to some extent, Regent Simonson, I think that's what you were getting to, is someone who's a fit with the institution and is going to be here and be able to contribute at the highest level. The next phase of the process is the recruitment phase, and admittedly, while the first phase is very much open and highly visible, the second phase of the process is somewhat dark, because that's when we take everything that we've been told, create that profile, and identify the skill sets that we ought to be looking for in the appropriate candidates. And this is when we start to reach out to them, and we reach out to them based on the parameters that the search committee and the board would provide. So if you're talking about increasing the flexibility so that we could reach to individuals who are non-traditional candidates, then we will do that. If we're looking at traditional candidates, we'll certainly do that. And in that process, during about a 4 or 5 week period, we're basically reaching out to individuals, those who are, as I mentioned previously, who are not on the market, and convincing them that this is an opportunity you ought to take a look at. And so that second phase of the process is all about recruitment, reaching out, making sure that we get nominations from faculty and staff, following up on those nominations, talking to the professionals across the country at different universities, and asking for their nominations, and then frankly looking at those individuals that may be non-traditional from within the state that we ought to be looking at, so we can make sure we invite them to participate in the process and be candidates. Keep in mind, a pool has to be robust, but it has to be diverse, and I mean diversity in every form, including professional diversity. You may ultimately decide to focus on individuals who come from the academic environment. Perfectly fine. That's your choice as a board. That's certainly the choice of the search committee. But it's our job to make sure that we have all parties represented in that candidate pool. So then you have an opportunity to select what you want. So in that second phase, it's all about recruitment, getting them in, assessing the qualities, and making sure they meet the qualifications that you've stated. The third phase of the process is the assessment phase, and this is where we now have the committee start to evaluate the paperwork and ultimately interviewing the candidates. I think there's a question, so I'll stop here. Regents.
Regent Swigum.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Mr. Pimentel, going to the recruitment phase
Yes.
That you just had passed through, tell me the appropriateness or the inappropriateness of even members of the Board of Regents, members of the Regents, of knowing people around the country that they should be nominated to apply. Is that appropriate for us to reach out to individuals who might be a president now or might be a possible president in the future?
Yeah, we would hope that the members of the Regents channel all recommendations, nominations to whoever the chair of the committee is going to be. And this way we could then determine what's the best way to reach out to the individual. What we want to do, and often what happens when we have regents making those calls, is that sometimes individuals walk away with the wrong impression. They feel that because they've been contacted, that must mean that they're going to receive special consideration. And so in order to prevent that potential conflict, we ask individuals, we certainly want to get your input, so we'll ask you to make nominations, but to send them through the chair of the search committee, who will also be admitted. So
it's appropriate to do that.
Oh, absolutely.
Happen to know somebody in California or happen to know somebody in North Dakota or wherever that would be.
Yeah, in fact, we would encourage that. In fact, we're going to encourage faculty and staff to do the same. So absolutely, you will have the same opportunity to do so.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Regent Anderson.
Thank you, Chair McMillan. Mr. Pimentel, I've got a couple of questions, and just for my own behalf. First of all, I'll say that I think we as a group need to know the weight that can be on the shoulders of this board, as this is one of the very most important jobs in the state of Minnesota. We have one land-grant college, and this is the person that is going to be running that college and university for the next several years. And I think to that end, and I'm going to ask you, I'll get to a question here eventually, but I think to that end, it's important on the investigative part, who do we want and what attributes do we want this person to have? I think faculty, as you talk with them, may give you one idea. I think the people that are technology innovators in Minnesota may give you another idea. I think the people from the medical community in the state of Minnesota might give you another idea. I think people that live in rural Minnesota, like myself, may give you another idea. You know, and as a rural Minnesotan, many times we feel we're left out on some of the decisions that affect our community and our state. So I guess I think part of the very, very important part that has to be done is who are we looking for, and what does that person mean to the state of Minnesota? I think it's imperative. That being said, I would like you to tell me, in general, how does this type of search for a major land-grant university take the balance between leadership on one hand, academic heritage on another hand, and being able to be a free thinker and look to the future with an open mind on their third hand? I don't know too many three-handed people, but how do we balance that? That's a process that I need to know.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you for the question, Regent Anderson. That is the tough part of this type of a search. The easy part is determining whether or not someone has the academic credentials. Easy to determine, because they either have the right number of publications, they've either received the right kind of grants, they have the right kind of stature, they belong to the right societies and so forth. That part's easy. I would even say the leadership part is easy to assess, because we look at the history that individual has had at different institutions, whether it's within higher education or outside of higher education. We could see how they've been able to establish a vision. We could see how they've executed on that vision, how they inspire people. We could see how they interact with people. We could see whether or not people get energized being around them. We could see whether or not they deliver on what they promise. We could see that. We could measure that. The free thinker and the fit of who you want, that's where the challenge really is in trying to figure out, okay, if we could figure those out very easily, then the next piece of, is a free thinker, is a person innovative, is an individual creative, is it creativity that is specific to this institution? Because what might have worked at another institution may not work here. You know, do they have those interpersonal skills to be able to lead in this environment? And so the who question becomes really very important. And I will tell you, when searches fail, they don't fail because search firms haven't been able to find the individual who is the person who's academically qualified. No, or that doesn't have the leadership skill. They fail primarily because collectively we have not done a good job of identifying what it is that we really want in the individual and what we expect that individual to do. And so part of what will need to take place here, because you're right, every group is going to have a different desire, a different need. And so trying to figure out what that is. And so part of what we will do is use the search committee as that first frontier of vetting and really having those dialogues. But before we get to them, I would hope that we as consultants, and certainly with the chair of the committee, once that chair is appointed, that we'll have an opportunity to meet with each one of you to get your perspective, so that we could put together an amalgamation of what it is that we believe is necessary, based on not our thought, but what you're expressing.
Follow up, Regent Anderson?
Very briefly, I think I heard an answer there that kind of makes sense to me. I think we can't do this rushing, because it seems to me the first third of what we do, the assessment of what we need, who we want, who we are, really needs to be done thoroughly before we can move forward. So I guess if I have anything to say about this, I would say let's get that assessment down before we start running.
Right. No, I agree with you. I would also mention one other thing, and something I will mention to the committee, and I will mention to you as well, is that at the end of the day, if you don't see the candidates that excite you, stop the process, and let's keep looking. You know, because often what happens is the momentum of the process takes over and supersedes the importance of finding the right person. And so if that's what needs to happen in order to get the right person, then let's do that. I will tell that to the committee, and then certainly when candidates, the finalists come to you for your evaluation, I will ask you at that point in time to do the same. Just because we have the finalists here doesn't mean you have to take any of them. Hold the bar high, and then let's make sure we hit it. And if you don't like what we bring to you, then let's go do it again. Because ultimately, that is better for the institution than selecting the wrong individual.
Thank you.
Regent Simonson, did you have a hand up on the process side of things?
You mentioned failed searches. I was interested in reading the Trib this morning about, we talked about I think Regent Hsu, brought up the issue when we were at a meeting in Red Wing about the failed search with the Minnesota State Universities. I was surprised in the Trib today to see that your firm was one of the search firms in that failed search. Could you comment on that?
Yeah, now I could comment on some of it I can't, only because I was not involved in that search. But being one of the founding principals of the firm, I take responsibility for anything my firm does. Right. So I'm based in Los Angeles. That was handled by our Philadelphia office, and one of our partners conducted that search. Kind of coming back to a comment that Regent Anderson made, it's important that we determine what it is that we're looking for in order for a search to be successful. And then second, there needs to be the fortitude to say, we're not seeing it, let's do it again. And if I have to do a postmortem on that particular search, I would say that not having been involved, so it's easy for me to, in a very detached way, to make comment is those two things I think needed to be revisited.
Thank you.
Thank you. You want to get back to process? At some point, we're going to switch over here and hit the characteristics too, but you maybe take us through the rest of the process conversation.
So once we recruit the candidates and we get into the assessment phase, that's phase number 3, this is where the committee takes everything they heard from the listening sessions, takes the input that we've provided them, and starts to evaluate the backgrounds of the candidates based on the profile. Now, the profile should accurately resemble what it is that you as a board are looking for in the thing. It goes back to the who question. If that document doesn't capture that, then I promise you we'll find you candidates. We're just not going to find you the right ones. And so the committee will then assess the candidates based on that profile, identify their strengths and weaknesses, and then determine which candidates they wish to interview. Now, that's the first juncture during which the committee could tell me to go back and look for more candidates. Because it's when they see the paperwork, if they do not like what they're seeing, if they don't like the quality of the pool, if they don't like the depth of the pool, if they don't like any aspect of the pool, and I will ask them this, and I hope that they're honest with me, that they could tell me, please go back and recruit some more, and we will go ahead and do so. And we'll continue to go back and forth until you have a pool that the committee feels excited about and they feel is worthy of being interviewed. So in this phase, it's not only the paper screening, it's the back and forth of fine tuning to make sure that we're looking for the right and we're getting the right kind of candidates. That part of the process culminates when the committee does the first round interview, sometimes referred to as an airport interview. This is a preliminary interview. They spend time with the candidates, get to know the candidates, and then get to decide whether or not we have the right pool. That's the second part in this structure, in this process, where the committee gets to tell me to go back again if they don't see what they like. Okay, at no point do the committee members need to accept any of the candidates that we bring forward unless they're excited about them. So after the interview, we would hope that there would be a group of candidates that the committee would be excited about, would be their lead candidates, candidates that they would then want to forward to you for your final assessment. That would conclude phase number 3, when they do the handoff to the board. But again, that handoff will not occur unless the committee is excited about the candidates that they're moving forward with. If not, they'll ask us to go back and do it again. Now, I'll stop here.
Regent Hsu.
Thank you, Chair McMillan. As someone who doesn't expect to be on this search advisory committee, it's hard for me to understand how the search advisory committee would work and to be able to figure out who fits our profile, because I don't even know if we're going to get a chance to approve a profile before you go out there to the search advisory committee to ask them to evaluate people against that profile. So it's hard for me to understand exactly how this process is going to be able to work properly until it gets to the board level. And we're only going to see a small fraction of the candidates because they'll have been weeded through. Right. It says in here 10 to 12 qualified candidates for first round interviews. And, I'm a little bit early with this part of my question, but, in looking at the searches of the past, I'll go back to Hasselmo. There were 2 candidates, one internal, one external. Udolph, 1 finalist. Brunig's, no finalists, and they chose the interim. And then Kaler, 1 finalist. So how do we avoid getting to the point where we do all this work and then the board ends up with 1 finalist and it's basically an up or down vote on that last person?
Before Mr. Pimentel jumps in there, I will say, Regent Hsu, that the board will have input and an opportunity to ratify and approve what we come up with for a charge. And the charge to the committee, I would hope, would leave all 12 of us in solid understanding about where we'll be engaged and where we'll be delegating to the committee to advance the process. So with that, you can tackle the rest of that question about the tail end of the process if you are able or want to.
Regent Hsu, just maybe I could, from my perspective, if all I did was generate 1 candidate that comes to the board, we have a big problem. You have a problem, I have a problem. And all the searches, every presidential search I've done in the last 20 years, I can't think of one where what we did was give the board only 1 candidate or 2 candidates. Never happened. And the reason for it is it's not a choice. The choice has been made for you if all you get is 1, right? So know that I would suspect that the charge to the committee is going to be that you want 3 to 4 unranked candidates with full commentary, strengths and weaknesses, not a ranking, but strengths and weaknesses for the full board then to assess and review on your own. And then if you don't see what you like there, to provide clarification to the committee as to what you didn't see, and then have us go back out and recruit more candidates so that you get, so you actually have the pool that you want. Yeah.
Follow up, Regent Hsu.
Thank you, Chair McMillan. I'm not saying that it would be your fault if that.
No, I would see it as my fault. Yeah.
But in the case, in the last case, in terms of the Kaler search, the search that produced President Kaler, the other people did not want their names disclosed, and so they dropped out at the end after they were actually, they were actually deemed to be finalists, but their names actually never came to the board. I don't know if they came to the board, but they never came to campus. So they were never interviewed, so it was effectively 1 person at the end of that.
Oh, got it.
If what you're saying is that if that was the case, then we would step back and we would say, instead of putting that 1 person forward, we would go back and try and find other candidates. But then my concern would be, that would kind of be a failed search in my view, in terms of you provide 1 candidate and then you have to rush out and find a bunch of other ones to make up the rest of the list.
Yeah, usually when that happens, it is, we don't call it a failed search, but we do call it an extended search, and we go back.
Extended search, sorry.
And then we go back. I guess in my mind, it's only a failed search if you end up hiring the wrong person, or you hire somebody because you had no other choice, right? So maybe to partly to clarify, we don't, in the fourth step of this process is going to be the board selection. Unfortunately, I don't know what that's going to look like, and let me tell you why. Because you're right, there are going to be some candidates who will be insistent that if their name were to go public, that they would not move forward in the process. But I would argue that we would know that early on in the process, right? We would know that well before we get to the final stage as to whether or not someone's going to have that issue. It's very rare that that issue just pops up at the last minute. Candidates will tell us up front, I cannot participate if this is a public process, right? So that's part of it. But more importantly, when we look at the tail end of the process, one of several scenarios could take place. One is that the individuals that participate in the process, part of my job is to try to emphasize to them as to the importance of being vetted by a broader list of constituents. And part of my argument for doing that is you're entering into a marriage. Wouldn't you like to see and spend some time with the different groups that you're going to be representing to see whether or not you're a good fit with them? It's not just whether or not they're looking at you and saying, "Gosh, are you a good fit with us?" I mean, that certainly is happening, but they're doing the same kind of assessment. So part of what we'll see at the tail end of the process, one of several scenarios. One is a group of candidates who may be hesitant initially, and then at the tail end decide, in order for me to make this decision for my own personal well-being, professional well-being, it's in my best interest to spend time with a larger group of individuals. So certainly one way to do it. Ideally, that's what we want. It's better for the campus community. It's more transparent. Everyone sees everything that's going on. It would be my preference. The second thing that may happen is that you'll have a group of candidates who will have some concerns about what that might look like at the tail end and how much exposure they'll have. And so what they will do is they'll wait until that period of time to figure out how they're going to approach it. Okay. And so we would then at that point sit down with the committee and try to develop a strategy for how we keep them engaged so that you still have the opportunity to fully vet them. Right? The third aspect is the one that I least like, and that is where, but it's one that is a viable possibility, just not my favorite, where the board interviews a small group of candidates, and then the campus community gets to vet the one candidate. That's been happening a lot in higher education. State of Texas does that. There's always one sole finalist, and that it's that person's job to have unless something goes terribly awry. And then that person will come out and visit the campus and engage all the stakeholders. The problem with that, it falls a little flat only because, you have no point of comparison. And so know that we're approaching this from the perspective that we want to make the process as inclusive as possible from beginning to end. And so we're going to be articulating that to the candidates. Now, some of the candidates, unless we're able to promise them that it will be a closed search, which in this state we can't do anyway, it kind of takes that option off the table. So I think that it then improves our chances for having a broader cross-section to come out and be fully vetted. Only because we're taking the completely closed search completely off the table before we even get started. And so those candidates who are most apprehensive about it are not going to participate because of that. And so we won't even get them in the pool.
All right, Regent Cohen.
Thanks, Chair McMillan, and thanks, presenters. Actually, Regent Hsu asked my question, which was, does the board see the profile that the committee has built? Because to me, a lot has to go in with trusting the committee to sort through and arrive at, say, 3 recommendations to the board or whatever. So I think it's important that we see what they're gauging their choices on. And so I think you answered yes, that the board would see the profile that the committee has drawn up. Is that right?
Regent Cohen, I think I answered that we would certainly, if we write the charge that way and put some process into the charge, that could happen. And I don't know that any of us envision the board actually voting again on something like that, but the board would be informed formally and informally if that's what the expectations are for the committee to bring that back to us. What I wouldn't personally as chair, I wouldn't want to build into it as another approval process, but if there's great angst about the profile coming from the board, I'll know it, and the committee chair will know it, and Mr. Pimentel and Mr. Gates will know it, and we'll get it right. So that's how I'd answer it, but you've done this many more times than me, so.
No, you're on target.
Okay.
Yeah, we would produce the first draft, get it vetted by the committee, and then it would be up to the chair.
Good. I have Regent Simonson and then Rocha, and then I do not want to lose Mr. Gates' piece of this and get things going on the characteristics and qualities and qualifications. But Regent Simonson.
Thank you, Chair McMillan. Please remember that I'm onboarding. I'm just trying to understand some of this stuff. So if this question is out of order, you can just tell me that. But I appreciate what I've read and heard about the breadth of the committee, having a lot of different people involved, including some of the people on the board here. How is that committee going to be chosen? And if that's something we're going to deal with later, that's fine.
Good question, and what Regent Powell and I have been working on with the board office is starting to rough out a nameless matrix of what communities do we need to have represented. In fact, I've started this week to meet with some of the key stakeholders that we obviously know we want represented, and then we're also having conversations about the right makeup of the regents who would participate on that. So you are a little ahead of I'm ahead of my skis to answer that any further than that because we're not done. But next week, I commit to you that we will have our initial work ready for you on committee makeup and on a rough outline of what that might look like, size and composition. And as I said in my opening comments, it's my expectation that the board would have an opportunity to ratify the makeup of that committee at its September regular meeting. Does that answer it, Regent Simpson? Okay, Regent Rocha, and then I've got Regent Beeson too.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Regent Simonson's question leads directly into my comment. As I'm trying to understand how we're moving forward in this, which I think we all agree, most significant enterprise any of us can engage in as members of this board. I'm drawn to a few sort of important principles, and for our presenters, I appreciate what you brought forward and the guidance that you previously provided us. My presumption, and maybe a unwise one, is that you understand how this board gets selected. It is singular. It is unique. There is no other board in the world selected like this board. And it's not even something. I mean, were you to think that you have the obligation to your elector, were it a governor, you have one phone call to make to kind of get a sense of where that person would see, the institution moving. We have the legislature and through them representation of the entire state. Where I get a little bit, concern maybe a bit strong, but what I want to be mindful of as we go forward is that when we're getting this input from these constituencies that the chair has just talked about, I'm still trying to calibrate and understand the idea of setting up this separate committee, separate from this board. Because it would seem to me that there's an argument that the feedback from all of these constituencies really ought to be something that every member of this board be exposed to, because ultimately we're the ones that will cast the final vote. And we're ultimately the board that will have to decide who is the right candidate for this position. And so when you have a committee of this variety, which will have some component of this board present, but certainly not a majority, I would be very surprised were this to be a majority, you literally could end up with the unhappy circumstance that the candidate that would be most favored by 7 members of this board is discharged or is not considered or advanced by this committee, that is the search committee that we are forming. And so perhaps whether the presenters can speak to it or whether the board leadership can speak to it, how do we ensure that the proper charge with respect to this board and our responsibility as individual members of the board, how do we ensure that that doesn't get bypassed when we have this input being provided to now a third-party entity, in which case, and we've heard this term before, we end up with a fully baked determination where this board is now tied with the challenging decision of, do you accept what's brought forward against the cost of having to re-engage the search and so on and so forth. If I'm not being clear, please let me know and I'll try again, but if you can respond to that, I'd appreciate it.
Sure, thank you, Regent Rocha, and I think you used the word charge a minute ago, so I've got a two-part answer for you. One is that the board would ratify not only the charge, but the composition of the committee. And yes, you do have to rely on the chair and the vice chair here, or trust us to do our very best to create a committee that does reflect not only the substantial input from this board that's important, but all the rest of the constituents inside and outside the university. So that's what we're going to tackle, and the charge is something you will have input to, and the composition of the committee is something you'll at least have an opportunity to see. And I use the word ratify as a carefully chosen word. Hopefully we will be doing our homework here in terms of meeting with all of you, talking about what that looks like, so that when the opportunity to ratify comes, whether you like every element of it, you hopefully can like enough of it to support it. So that there will be considerably more board presence in the search committee than there was when we found President Kaler. So I think that was one regent at that time, and I'm envisioning more than that, but something, not a lot more. But we also want to enable the committee to go get its work done too, and I think we, in many ways, have to trust the regents that we delegate responsibility to participate in that committee to represent our views. But you're right, the process probably isn't perfect, but that's the best I can see it right now, and I've spent considerable time thinking it through. Regent Powell might have more to add on that. I doubt our Mr. Gates or Mr. Pimentel have more to add on that. That's up to us. But think about the charge and think about the opportunity to see that committee well socialized ahead of the meeting, and then an opportunity to express your perspective on it when we meet in September. Anything I missed there, Regent Powell?
I don't think so, Chair McMillan. So I think I'm going to just restate Regent Roche's concern, which is that, I think I'll speak for myself. I want an inclusive process, and I appreciate the process that Mr. Pimentel has outlined, and we've talked extensively about the inclusiveness of that process and of the committee. But what I hear Regent Roche is saying, and I hear that, I hear what he's saying, is that that's good, but the board ultimately has to make the decision. And so how do we make sure that we don't get into a situation where there's the advisory committee and the board just are really out of sync? And I think that's the concern that's being raised. And I think I agree with your answer. I think that's legitimate, and we have to work very hard to make sure that doesn't happen. But I'd love to hear, I'm sure you've seen these situations. Mr. Pimentel, maybe you can comment further. Yeah. Thank you, Chair McMillan.
I want to keep the dialogue moving here and ask Regent Beeson, and I see Regent Shu has his hand up here too. Remember, we do want to talk about a deep focus on qualities and characteristics here. So I'm going to entertain Regent Beeson's question, comment, then Regent Shu's, and then we're going to move on.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, gentlemen, for coming to the Twin Cities. For the record, I do have to recognize Regent Simonson's comments and to say that I was disappointed to read about the engagement that your firm had across the river, and for me to have to read about the newspaper. I don't put that on you necessarily, and I really don't want to talk about it because the decision was made to sign this contract with your firm administratively, not bring it to the board. And so our job is to help make you as successful as possible, and we need to look forward. But we did miss an opportunity to get the most impactful sort of feedback from our sister board in St. Paul. So I am disappointed with how this is starting from that standpoint. Beyond that, sort of my concern is that we're sending the consultants out pretty quickly without really giving them sort of the directive, the image of what we want this next president to be. We have the standard job description, which looks pretty similar to all major research. I mean, it's not instructive. It's required, but it's not instructive, and I'm worried that we won't have time to be able to tell them what the dominant skill set is that we're looking for in the next president. And I'd like the chair and vice chair to work up something that looks at our sort of individual and collective priorities, that they're all a little different, but try to help them with what that great skill set is. And the answer can't be that the candidates are strong in all areas. That's the divide. You know, that's just not the way it is. It's a little bit like football coaches. You go out and serve. You know, you want the sales tape. You want the technical person. We just have to be able to give. I'm not hearing the board. I don't think we've had a chance that we have focused completely on the first part of the transition, which is related to President Kaler, but we're moving, kind of lurching into this process with a fairly short timeline and order without getting to the most important part of the deal, which is what are those characteristics. So I don't know when that happens. And in the absence of the board talking about that extensively, I'd like the chair and vice chair to, as our leaders, I agree with you, Chair McMillan, we do have to rely on you through this process. And it's going to feel, I came in on the tail end of the last search, and it was a chair and vice chair driven process. Things are going to happen so quickly, and there's just there has to be a reliance, and those that aren't on there have got to give the benefit of the doubt to those that are inside that process. Thank you.
Regent Hsu?
Thank you, Chair McMillan.
Thank you, Regent Beeson. Well stated, and we're listening.
Thank you, Chair McMillan. And I think this is a great discussion. I'm listening carefully to everything that's said here, and I do want to clarify that because I think I've heard two separate things. I've heard a process from our presenters, and then I've heard a different process from you. And what I'll say is that if you're saying, Chair McMillan, that we're going to approve the charge and the committee, then the committee cannot come back with a bunch of ideas about what this job description should be, because we're going to give them the charge ahead of time, which is not what I believe I heard from our presenters. I believe that what I heard from the presenters was that the committee, after it was formed, would then come up with their ideas of what this person should be. So I actually don't believe we're all on the same page right now, but I do hope that what you're saying is the approach that we're going to take, because I think we'll have a more likely chance of being able to come up with a person that actually fits what we're looking for.
Well, we've got to make sure we all have the same vernacular in mind here, and that is committee composition, 1, committee charge, 2, and position profile, 3. And I think Regent Beeson just helped inform some of his expectations, and sounds like it's shared by others, that Regent Powell and I, with board office leadership, get to work on some of the position profile core elements. We're not going to write that for them, but I think if we have agreement with the board around the core elements of that they can then take and shape into something that's informed by the faculty and the students and the staff and the people that actually work here every day, unlike us. I think that's the right way to do it. But Mr. Pimentel, if I'm mixing up process or order there, but we are clearly charge and committee composition, and we should inform to the extent we can ahead of when those are finalized what we expect to see in a position description or a position profile. That's what I just heard Regent Beeson ask us for too. So.
Regent Hsu, and that's correct. So if you look at it from the perspective that the charge to the committee has to be specific enough about what you're looking for, so that when they go out and we start these listening tours, it's how does that information fit into the paradigm that you've established already? It's not the committee's job to go out and create a whole new paradigm, right? It's to feed into the instructions that you've provided as the board. What you should see as the end product then are candidates who meet the criteria and the framework that you established, right? So think about it from the perspective that what the committee members are doing is increasing the understanding of those particular issues, how it plays out at the different campus, right? So if you say we need somebody who has exceptional leadership in an aspect of building an institution, then that becomes the framework. And so when we go out and meet with the different constituencies, we're asking, how does that leadership play out here? So that way the committee has a deeper understanding how that might look differently in Morris versus Duluth versus the Twin Cities. But it's not for them to create a whole new paradigm and say, you know, we heard what the board said, but that's not what we want to do. We're going to go in a completely different direction. If there's a major disconnect between what we hear in the different visits, then it would be the chair of the committee who would then come back to the board and say, we have a disconnect. Because unless we're on the same page, you're right. What's going to happen is we're going to go out looking for a candidate who might satisfy the committee but doesn't satisfy the board. At the end of the day, you're the one with the fiduciary responsibility, and so therefore it needs to satisfy you.
And the chair of the committee will be a member of this board. I'm going to, Regent Anderson, on this point, otherwise we really want to get Mr. Gates teed up here on the, go ahead.
I'll just, thank you, Chair McMillan. Just very brief, I hear Regent Beeson, Regent Hsu, Regent McMillan. I think they're all speaking to what I spoke to earlier, that the beginning part of this process is we have to make, whether it's us in conjunction with the search committee or others, university community or the faculty, we really, I'm glad you came in the room because I thought of this. My friend Regent Sviggum coaches baseball, and when he looks for a relief pitcher, he looks for somebody that holds the runner, get strikeouts, and get ground balls and do double plays. I think we need to know what are the attributes, the top 2 or 3 attributes that successful land-grant college presidents have had. And I think that's going to take a lot of dialogue to figure that out. You probably have some ideas, and off the top of your head, can you name some?
Yeah. There's usually 4 or 5 that come up really quickly in today's type of university. One is someone who demonstrates leadership from the perspective of, one, developing a vision, getting people excited about that vision, and third is identifying how to engage parties that have been disengaged in fulfilling that vision. That's number 1. Number 2 that always comes up is the opportunity to identify new revenue streams for long-term sustainability of the university, so that they're nurturing the existing revenue streams that usually the state legislature provides, but they're also looking at other ways in which the institution, other than tuition, can support itself. Right? The third thing is academic excellence. How do you assure, because at the end of the day, that is your calling card, right? Is how do you ensure academic excellence? But academic excellence across the entire board. And then the fourth is usually accessibility. To the point that you made earlier, how do you make this education, this institution, one that is responsive to the needs of the students it's educating, and doing so, doing it in a manner that reaches all 4 corners of the state, and not just to the downtown urban area, but to the rural areas, suburban areas, and really making sure that it's comprehensive. And that, for a land-grant institution, is one of the biggest challenges, because in some ways you have to be all things to all people, but you don't have the money to be all things to all people, so you have to be selective as to how that gets represented, right? And that accessibility becomes more and more important as, frankly, as you start pursuing other research, other dollars to support the institution, and you run the risk of then alienating your own electorate, your own citizenry, by making it so exclusive that people can't come here. And so that's balancing those needs. Those are usually what we start talking about, and then from beyond that, now we start talking about outreach, fundraising. We start talking about the need for the individual to engage in identifying how this university separates itself and distinguishes itself from all the other research universities that are land-grant institutions.
So again, I think we need to walk before we run, be patient, and get it right.
Key attributes of a successful public land-grant research university. That seems to be a good transition point, doesn't it?
Yes, absolutely.
Very good. Mr. Gates?
Thank you. So it's useful, I believe, to approach this question starting with looking at the general and moving to the specific. the general being the landscape of public higher education nationally and internationally, and what the trends are, what the future is going to demand, and take that down to the specific and what your citizens need, what your students need, what your faculty need, and the culture and the mission here to specific to the University of Minnesota, and that should be the starting point for the question of what kind of person, what qualifications, what skills and attributes they bring to the table to take you where you want to go. We were fortunate enough to be brought in to serve you by doing this search and managing the search effort, and that was largely based on our work in the area. And as Alberto said at the outset of his comments, it's not a one-size-fits-all, and we have competition from similar institutions on this search, but though we might be dipping in the same pool, there are going to be certain specific things that you want. Some of the general themes we see in president searches around the country are the increased complexity of the job, the increased visibility and in some ways isolation of a campus chief executive in these days. We also see the challenge of leading the diversity of stakeholders, not just those within the four walls of the university, but the surrounding community and everything from prospective students all the way through donors, as well as again the citizenry of the state. So this dialogue, there's some tension about what we're looking for, and I think that the place to start right now is where do you want to be, and what kind of person will ultimately get you there.
So your thoughts,
Mr. Chairman.
Regent Omari.
So just for clarity, this is our opportunity to say here the qualities that we. Okay, I'll start.
Thank you.
Just find somebody that can walk on water. You know, the core things that I think of, and I actually have a list of about 15. I'm not gonna go with all of them, but I think you hit on an important one around revenue streams. Is something that we as a board have talked about, and we have to continue talking about somebody who's innovative in that thought or thinking and thought process and interested actually in tackling that. Student-centered is top of the list for me. Someone who appreciates and has been in the classroom as not just a student but also faculty, professor. Someone who appreciates shared governance and the important role of students and faculty and the staff component to be thinking about as well, the number of staff that don't fall into that category. I think about someone with deep interest in truly understanding the unique landscape of Minnesota. And that's something that we'll have to do as a board as well, to really prep somebody with a lot of information about the unique landscape of Minnesota as a state, and the multiple stakeholders and the history of the state, so on and so forth. And then I'll leave, I mean, obviously legislative I think is just a no-brainer that has to be in there, as well as, you know, budget experience and that type of thing. But I'll stop there.
Regent Cohen.
Thanks, Chair McMillan. It's something that's already been mentioned, and to me it's probably the most important, because I think probably the candidates that we get toward the end particularly are going to have a lot of those skills, and I agree with Regent Omari's list. I think all of those things are pretty crucial, but I think often everybody comes with those kinds of that kind of expertise. The thing that's so important, I think, is that they want to be president of the University of Minnesota and not just be a president. And I'm probably one of the few people who was involved in the last search, but a lot of candidates who are highly, highly qualified came by, and and they wanted to be president. It was time to move up. They had been either a provost or a president of a smaller university or something, and so they were ready to move to a more comprehensive university. And for somebody who really cares about the University of Minnesota, it can be in a variety of ways that they can show that. But to me, that's a huge factor.
Thank you, Regent Cohen. Regents Johnson or Lucas, any thoughts from afar? You didn't interrupt, so I don't want to.
No, it sounded good to me.
I missed that, Regent Lucas. What?
No, I'm listening.
Okay, you're listening. Sorry.
I'm hearing really good things. Yep.
Mr. Chairman, if I could. Please,
Mr. Gates, and then I'll get to you, Mr.
Just to drill down on a couple of the points brought up thus far. Any further detail on the uniqueness of Minnesota? We'll have multiple opportunities to talk. We've talked about having individual conversations with various stakeholders to include the regents individually. But I'd like to just drill down a little bit on the uniqueness of Minnesota.
If I may, Mr. Chair.
Yes, Regent Omari.
I think the political history of the state is one that is unique, with significant levels of engagement across the board and interest in the University of Minnesota as well. I think if you look at the land that the university sits on is indigenous land, and making sure that, again, I'm not saying that they have to be an expert in indigenous studies, but a high level of interest in wanting to know about that context so that we can have someone who will be able to engage with the multiple populations that we have. A campus that has a federal mandate out in Morris for American Indian students, one of two campuses, free tuition, unfunded mandate, by the way. And so when I talk about the landscape of some of the largest economic gaps in the entire country and one of the largest education gaps in the country, particularly in the metro area, but things like that will need to be very explicit about and have someone that I think would be interested in delving into those. Because if we are, a leading public institution, but yet K-12 is floundering, that's something that I would think a president would want to engage in. So that's what I mean by the uniqueness. I think folks say, oh, it's an institution. There's a bunch of them, but I think we as a state are significantly unique from other places.
Sure. Thank you.
Regent Rocha.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As I mentioned earlier, this is a monumental time for the university and for this board, but I also think that it's significant beyond just the University of Minnesota. I sometimes try to reconcile the unlikely event of me returning to this board 20 years after having served on it with the time that we're in right now. And I have to say that, with Mr. Gates, I think he makes very good points. Certainly the presidency of the University of Minnesota is highly complex. But I feel strongly that I can state that on behalf of the ghosts of regents past and presidents past, the job was plenty complex in 1989, 1990. We talk a lot about the different challenges that the position faces, and I think to some extent that the challenges are kind of what you make them. But I don't want to fall on the subjective in such a way that we can't really critically analyze how we hire and how we compensate, and that's where I'm heading right now. I want to look at some objective considerations as we go into this process. As those of you who've attended conferences and read the materials, the Association of Governing Boards is spending significant resources in trying to understand the loss in public support and public assessment of higher education, and they're seeking ways to try to restore that public standing of higher education across the country. And I think that some of the answers to that are actually right in front of all of us as trustees across the country, but we haven't really had this sort of straightforward conversation. When I served on the board previously, the president's compensation was roughly equivalent to that of the governor of the state of Minnesota. Now, over that 25-year period, the governor's compensation hasn't really increased appropriately. But nonetheless, it gives you, from the standpoint of an inflationary growth, executive compensation in higher ed has grown far faster than the rate of inflation. And I would suggest that being governor of Minnesota is also a complex and challenging position. In the early 90s, they used to have a poll in Minnesota, the major newspaper in Minneapolis, for the most popular public official in the state of Minnesota, and it was routinely the president of the University of Minnesota. Now, I always thought that was a little bit unfair, because if you had told someone that they were a candidate for that position and they could run some opposition research and negative ads, maybe it would even that out. But we don't see that same assessment. And I don't think it's the personalities and the positions. I think the people we've had in the positions are strong, but I think it has much more to do with the fact that people don't perceive it as a public office anymore. It's not public service anymore. And so, between the conclusion of my term in 95 and my return to the board in 15 and today, the two things that have grown exponentially in that time are executive compensation and tuition and the debt that comes with it. And so our ability to attract public support, which includes funding, I think has been exceedingly stressed by this development. And if we look at this subjective, the University of Minnesota is a significant part of the higher education, research, and land grant community. I think if you look at us as a top 20, and certainly we're a top 20 research institution, we are 5% of that marketplace. I think that when we move forward with the conversation of the compensation goals for this hire, we're going to get a lot of pressure that, well, we have to go with what the market's doing. But that's not really how markets work. A market requires you to pay what you have to pay to get the asset that you want. And we also will have a huge impact in our ability to dictate what that market is for others as well. I think we see there are a couple of participants on the national scene that have made some progress in addressing this concern, and I think that we should join them. There are incredibly talented people with a commitment to academia and to public service who are out there. Now, I would ask anybody on this board, would anybody on this board suggest that we do not have the best military in the world? And I'm fairly confident, I could be wrong, but I'm fairly confident that everybody on this board would agree. But then the leaders of our military are also paid within a certain structure that is accepted by and understood by the public. And the compensation also includes the honor and respect that comes from that position, the critical position of leading our nation's military forces. But I would ask you to consider this. How do you think the public would perceive the military and support for the military if military commanders negotiated independent seven-figure compensation? Say, well, we need to give another X billion dollars to the military while our generals are all becoming, particularly well compensated, millions of dollars per year and so on. Now, I'm not suggesting that the university presidents all fall within a certain GS employee structure, but I think if you really think about it, much of the support for the military and for the role of the military comes from the fact, and the fact that has not eroded over that same period, by the way. And it's because people accept the fact that they're well compensated, but nonetheless, it is a public service as well as a position of importance and leadership. A very wise public leader once articulated that the key to finding an institutional leader was to uncover someone who loves public service and the role of the university more than he or she loves money. Now, I'm not suggesting that they should give away their time. It's a challenging job. They should be paid well. Their financial settings should not be an issue as they devote their lives toward serving the University of Minnesota and the constituents that rely on it. But when you recognize the downstream effects of the president's compensation and the impact on the public's view of the state's investment in the university, we should seek a candidate who is as much or more committed to advancing the mission of the university and serving our students and state than to securing personal financial gain. The era of big CEO contracts has coincided with the problem of single finalists. I think that we sometimes run into that where people are looking for job sort of hopping opportunities, and it's less about saying, yes, this is a position that I'm devoted to and I'm willing to put myself out there, and more about, is this where I can make the big leap? and make a big increase in compensation. So I don't think it's merely coincidental that those two things have transpired, because there was a time when you did have people who were willing to be public finalists, much like people would be seeking other public office for that matter. So at any rate, I'm pleased with the contract that we have with your firm. I'm pleased that we have taken away the incentive that runs with the compensation for the candidate that's ultimately selected. I was actually quite shocked to learn that that is the way it is, and I can speak more about that I have with respect to the board office as far as having the incentive for our advisors run counter to our pecuniary interests. And so I am pleased that we have that structured properly, and I would ask, and certainly my colleagues can weigh in with their own opinions, and I may be a lone voice on this issue, but I really seek, I believe that we will serve the university exceptionally well if we can find someone with that talent who is willing to fall within that range of being well compensated, but the honor and the distinction of being the president of one of the great institutions in the world has to be part of the attraction for those people. And I would just appeal to my colleagues as we go forward with this process that this is an opportunity for us to actually be leaders and to change the direction of higher ed across the country. I would love to get together with our trustees across the country and have this very conversation. There may be some limitations on that, but in terms of our ability to be leaders ourselves, that's where I would ask for us to really put our focus. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Regent Simonson.
Thank you, Chair McMillan. I think this goes to your question. This university has had a major impact on my life and my career. I'm from Greater Minnesota. I live in the Southwest, and I know in our strategic plan this is one of the things that's being addressed. But I would really like somebody that supports that. Agriculture in our state is huge, and I was just recently at a event that involved some students from here, FFA students, and a lot of industry here. It's called From the Ground Up, and the significance of agriculture to our state in terms of jobs, in terms of economic development, in terms of education. All that stuff was taught. Corn and soybeans are huge here. Water quality is huge here. We're first in the nation in turkey production. We're third in the nation in swine production. We're fifth or sixth in dairy production. So reaching out to Greater Minnesota in terms of that aspect is something I would like to see in an individual. And along with that, of course, is the diverse population. In the area that I live, a little town of 13,000, over 50% of the kids in grade school are English second language. And reaching that population, which is a growing population in our state, somebody that can really reach out to somebody like that. And then kind of a final point that I got a lot of points, but a final one I'll just raise here right now, is you'd mentioned something about alternative to revenues when you did that type of thing. And a very important aspect of my charge here, my thinking of being on the Board of Regents, is looking at ways to lower tuition, not have as much student debt. I think it's a critical problem. And I want somebody that can look at that and ways that we can increase maybe revenues from our intellectual property. I don't think we do a good job on that. And where we can be more creative and raise revenue. I'm not saying reduce the budget. I'm just saying let's change so we don't spend 24% of our budget on tuition. Let's look at other ways to raise income. And I think part of that has to do with Greater Minnesota as well. But it's also our medical school and leveraging our engineering school and leveraging our technology in a better way than we've done in the past. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, I'm winding down here, and I'll give Regent Powell and then Regent Beeson the last words, and then I'm going to turn back to our presenters and bring this thing to a close. So, Regent Powell.
Okay, well, thank you, Chair McMillan. Some of this will be a bit repetitive, but we are, I think many have said we're looking for someone who really is energized by our mission and is mission oriented and can fulfill that with the highest integrity. The second point I want to make is Mr. Pimentel, I think we had talked earlier about, what is the broad kind of context are we looking to? Is this maintain or manage decline? What is it? So many good things have happened at the university over the last several years across a lot of fronts. And so I think I think it's a very exciting time. And so we're transitioning to a future that, as you said, and you've heard from many other regions, it's going to be more challenging. And so we're looking for someone, I think, with a somewhat different skill set. But having said that, to me, I mean, this place it's very exciting. It is definitely a build kind of, there's a lot to build on. There's a lot of, opportunity to continue to strengthen the place going forward. So I would look at it as a build opportunity. And then just in terms of the uniqueness, Regent Omari talked about some of the internal unique aspects. I think it'll be important also to make sure that the candidate pool understand sort of the community and the state, because we are sometimes fly over. As someone who grew up in California with a wife who grew up in New York, and we're here for a long time, so I will tell you that this is the global center for medical technology. It's a global healthcare center. It's a global food and ag center. It's a global resource extraction region. It is the freshwater research institution, and location, if you will, in the country. And so there are a lot of aspects to the community that make it very rich, very prosperous, and some huge business and R&D centers here that I think really add to the vitality of the community and this particular opportunity. And we can give you more information on that as you get into the search, because I think it is important to actually understand this place.
Thank you.
Thank you, Regent Powell. Regent Beeson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As I was listening to my colleagues, I started to write down all the attributes that were, I think I stopped at 25. We got input from the other members, we would double that pretty quickly. The point is that that's what this job is. It's a broad-based skill set that we need. I don't think we're looking for a candidate that's deeply skilled in one area, but rather somebody who can respond to the almost unlimited number of issues. So more of a generalist approach. But having said it, I think that a president of a major land-grant university today has to have a working knowledge of finance, has to be able to understand that budget, because that's the pressure that boards feel and that boards respond to. And it's, to me, number one. And it isn't to presume for a candidate that gets this job that they believe that they have to come in and cut. But we want them to make an assessment, and a rational assessment based on numbers and based on their approach as to how they would approach, how they would deal with tuition. So they cannot be afraid to deal with the finance and the numbers. They have to be able to keep that fairly close to them. The other area, I think, all things equal, would be a willingness and ability to deal with an academic health and medical school. That's the area of most change and most upside. I mean, all the areas, I agree with Regent Powell, we're in a building situation. It's not a turnaround, this is a build. But if you sort of look at the landscape, we know where the upside is around the medical school and our partnership. And so I think somebody that has knowledge or willingness to go into that, that's a third of our budget. And it's a strong area for us. Thank you.
All right, I want to remind all of the regents that it's my understanding and my expectation that our search consultants, in tandem with the chair of the search committee to be named, will give everybody an opportunity to have this conversation in more of a one-on-one perspective. And so if you didn't say something today, there's not one of those forever hold your peace. We have lots more opportunity to engage, and I'm committed to that. And I know that Mr. Gates and Mr. Pimentel are as well. So we're closing in on about 15 minutes overtime. Would either of you like to make some conclusory comments here? I don't anticipate more input from the board at this point. I'll call on our friends from afar one more time to make sure I haven't missed Regent Lucas or Regent Johnson, but why don't you two, one or both of you, close us out here?
Fantastic. Well,
thank you.
Oh,
Mr.
there's
Chairman.
Regent Johnson. Okay.
I apologize to the board for not being there today. Had a funeral service and a committal that kept me here in Wilmer. Having said that, 2 or 3 thoughts that colleagues have brought forward. When I look at leaders in any organization, to include the University of Minnesota, I want to know from them what their vision for the next 5 to 10 years is for an organization and the University of Minnesota. Where are you going to take us? Because all good leaders know where they're going to go, and they know how they're going to get there. And for he or she to articulate that is extremely important for the state, for the university-wide, and for we as a board. Second of all, and this may surprise some of my colleagues, I want a president willing to challenge the board. We hold an election certificate from a political arena per se. Each one of us do it differently, but this vision that this leader has ought to be able to publicly or privately say to a board member, this is not part of the strategy and vision of this university. And sometimes I think that leaders have been too frail in doing that. Now, you're probably sitting there thinking, wait a minute, we're the Board of Regents. We have ultimate authority. Well, that may be true, but I see it as a partnership with the leadership. And so good leaders turn to their board, they turn to the senior vice presidents, they turn to faculty, student leaders, and ask them what it is, how we might move forward. Thirdly, I'd like to see a president who is very, very learned in politics. Now let me explain. I'm not talking about partisan politics. I'm talking about the understanding of human relationships. And to be honest, a good president of the University of Minnesota, in my opinion, looking back on past presidents, if they can be as vanilla as possible in their politics, it serves the university, it serves us best in the legislature, it serves us best with donors, and so on and so forth. It's relationships, it's visionary, and someone, Dean, in 5 to 10 years, the University of Minnesota is going to look like this. I want to lead it there, and here's how I'm going to do it. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you, Regent Johnson. Gentlemen, closing thoughts?
Just 2 items. One is, please know that we will do everything in our power to make sure that that the candidate pool is strong and of the quality that that you could be proud of. But I will ask you to assist me in that endeavor, and that is, if you don't see it, let us know, and then don't take them. Let's keep looking. I have no doubt that you'll hold the standard high. Know that that I'm with you on that, and it is our job to make sure that we deliver. And so if you don't see it, let us know, and we will make sure that we continue to look until we get what you're looking for. And then second, while we've suggested a process that is going to move quickly, know that it is not for the sake of speed that we're moving. It's to make sure that we stay ahead of the competition and that you get first bite at the apple. But it always starts with the quality of the candidates. If the candidate pool isn't strong, we'll slow it down. If it is strong, then know that we'll want to speed it up. But know that in this case, quality and speed could go hand in hand. But again, you'll be the judge of that, and we want to make sure that we're able to deliver at a level that you'll be happy with. And with that, we thank you for the opportunity to represent you and the university.
Thank you. That concludes the scheduled business before the board in this special meeting. I'd entertain a motion to adjourn. Second? All right, all in favor? Aye. We stand adjourned.
Aye.
It's